So I want to put everything in perspective. The house hasn't fallen down, we haven't had a tornado going through, so you know, and we're fine. But we've had a minor issue, which might actually be a major issue, of water. But in this room are freezers. Freezers really don't like standing in water. I'm Liz Zorab, and this is Byther Farm. For the last 2 autumns I've undertaken a planting project in this what I call the runway here, and the idea is that over time these will naturalise, and each side of this runway area will then be absolutely lined with daffodils. How beautiful is that going to look in years to come? Hello my lovelies. Hello. Do you think maybe that you should all be up under the trees and getting warm and staying dry? Do you? Hello my darlings. So we've lived here for about 20 months, and in that time I've developed the vegetable garden and an orchard, a half-acre food forest, and the beginnings of a cut flower field. Each year during winter, Mr. J and I go through an assessment process. We look back at what's been really successful during the year and things that have been challenging and things that just actually haven't worked. And I find this a really healthy, almost cathartic process, because it allows me to assess and to evaluate, and then to make any changes that we want to make, so that we can reevaluate next year, so that we are constantly learning. The first of those is that I'm not sure that this is the right year for developing the flower garden in that field behind me there. In our last home, I developed one area at a time. So it took me 2 years to develop the vegetable garden. I used raised beds in this area because, well, the ground was just so poor when we moved here. I needed to raise the level and create soil to be able to grow in. I've got 20 raised beds here of various different depths. And then I developed the central flower garden. In the central section of the garden I have created what is predominantly a flower garden. And I really wanted to have something that was very ornamental, because the rest of the site is quite utilitarian. But I also grow some edibles in here, but they're not for us. And then moved on to the market garden. And once again I'm growing this as a polyculture, and even though this is a relatively large space, I still want it to work as hard as possible for me. And through all of that time, I was also developing the food forest, because the vegetable garden, the market garden and the flower garden weren't just separate from, but were actually an integral part of that food forest. And what I realise I've done here, in my eagerness to kind of replicate the beautiful gardens that we had in our last home, is I've just pushed forward a little bit too quickly in trying to develop the different areas. So I'm super happy with the veg garden. Although we're on a north facing slope, I think I've done as much as I can to make that be a really nice area for growing vegetables in. And I'm happy with the orchard, and the food forest is starting to come together. Over the course of the next year, I am going to stop having bees on Byther Farm. Now, that doesn't mean bees are banished by any means, but I'm no longer going to have an apiary. So over the next few months I will get the beehives moved to a new site where they will no doubt live very happily. So how do I make this feel better in my head? How do I make this not feel like a failure? Well, it's absolutely not a failure, because part of the process that we do on the farm is a continual assessment, a constant adjustment, and an acceptance that it's perfectly okay to change and adapt and make things work for us the way we need them to. In our end of year assessment of how everything was growing and going on the farm, I made the decision to move the plants from the flower field up here into the food forest, and the first thing I wanted to do was create a shrubbery all along here. So these are all plants there, some are deciduous, some are evergreen, but they are going to just carry on growing and getting bigger and bigger each year. So eventually this border will be really floriferous, very attractive, even though at the moment it just looks like a few sticks. Actually, before I start showing you the plants, I just want to tell you I didn't plant these. So Niall from Niall Gardens and JB from Naturally JB came to stay and spent the morning putting all of these plants in for me. So I basically had to just cut the holes in the membrane to show them where the plants were going, and they did it all for me. I'm incredibly grateful. So this really hasn't been a cheap project, but I have saved an awful lot of money by taking a lot of my own cuttings, whether those are small shrubs or climbers that will be going in. Every plant that I can propagate to add to my border has saved some money. A little while ago I made a huge mistake in this garden. I wanted to plant up this field with masses of flowers, and I thought probably the easiest way to do that was to lay down some weed suppressing membrane, cut holes in it and plant through that, and it would give the plants a year or two to settle in and start forming some ground cover, which in turn would reduce the number of weeds and the grasses in this field, and start to create a kind of a mat, almost a bed of flowering plants. So I went online and I searched for biodegradable weed suppressing membrane. So I bought some biodegradable membrane and I used it, and it's like a very fine non-woven membrane, and it seemed to do the job just fine for a couple of months. And then it started falling apart into all these little pieces and kind of just disappearing into a puff of nothing, and all the dandelions and the weeds grew through. So I haven't been down here and done anything to this pretty soon after I put all these canes in, and they don't have toppers on them, so I'm not going to bend down too much. I kind of noticed something wasn't right. So I started looking a bit more deeply at what it was that I'd bought, and I'd bought some stuff called oxo-degradable. Well, it turns out that oxo-degradable has quite a specific meaning. It means that it will break down into very fine plastic particles, and it will keep on breaking down into finer and finer plastic particles, leaving my ground totally full of plastic, microplastic beads, microplastic particles, the very thing that I didn't want to happen. Now I know we all make mistakes sometimes, so at some point very soon Mr. J and I are going to have to come through, remove all the bamboo canes, lift any plants that are still in here that we want to move elsewhere, and scrape up as much of that membrane as we can possibly get. The point at which your garden can be considered frost-free will change depending on where you live, and the further south you are, the earlier that date is likely to be, and the further north, the later it's going to be. Here in West Wales, the guidelines say somewhere between the end of April and the middle of May, but I know from experience we still get frost as late as the middle of June. Just a quick look through the garden tells me that the seasons are changing. The brassicas that we grew for late winter and early spring are going to seed, producing an array of wonderful yellow flowers which the bees and other pollinators are absolutely loving. But at the same time, spring flowers have now come up, things like lupins and geums, aquilesias, hardy geraniums, and tons of forget-me-nots. Well, it turned out to be an absolutely glorious day. but it was so hot I felt it was not suitable for planting out plants, because they were just going to dry out in the sun and in the breeze. And it is really important to make sure that when you're planting your new plants into the ground that you give them a really good drink. And you also need to make sure that you're not going to put them out in the real heat of the day, when just that much heat is going to give them a lot of stress. What about stress? You don't like stress, do you? My little very laid back cat. Yes, come on then, here you go. I'm going back to my days in the old house, where I would just try stuff and just see what happened. Because, well, do you know what? I actually got quite a lot done when I didn't spend too much time worrying about planning, and I just got on with stuff. Okay, so I'm going to try again. One. We'll see how we get on with the others. I might need some different screws as well. So I will then cut the membrane out using the flame. That's not a flamethrower, it's just a little chef's flambe thing. And probably not a good idea for me to have a flamethrower. But anyway, I'll cut that out and then put some compost on top of the soil and plant into that. It's that time of year when there's masses going on in the garden. Things are growing really rapidly. Some harvests are coming out, new ones are going in. Midsummer is a great time to start thinking about seed saving. These are parsnips that I grew last year and have allowed to go to seed, and they flowered, and all sorts of pollinators have been and visited them, really enjoyed them, but now they're producing seed. So I'm going to be keeping an eye out for seeds that are ready to harvest. If you keep on top of deadheading, like I have been with this Monmouthshire, it'll just encourage more and more flowers to come. The same applies for all your flowering plants. Keep on top of watering, especially of anything that is newly planted. Plants like squashes and cucumber are going to need plenty of water. Try and keep it to the soil around them without splashing it on the leaves. And it's much better to give them a really good drink once a week than lots of little drinks. This week I've picked up some marjoram. This one's a gold splash one, and this is just a plain green one, although the leaves are looking quite yellow, but that's more about it needing to get into the ground and get some more nutrition. And there is a bumblebee flying around right in front of the camera. Perhaps it wants to know what I'm doing, or perhaps it wants to come and investigate some of these lovely flowers. And the next thing that I like is to bring out 2 containers for putting my weeds in. One for putting stuff that's going to go onto the compost heap, and another one for pernicious weeds that I want to get rid of elsewhere. And then I start by taking out the most obvious weeds that I can see, the tallest and the biggest, and the ones that are in flower or going to seed. So like this rosebay willow herb, and anything that's in seed or in flower and is likely to then go to seed, I don't put those on my compost heap because I cold compost. So I like to take the plants that I know are weeds first, and the ones that are very big and dominating the bed. I mean, hopefully you wouldn't leave them to get that big, but I do. And I try and use my time weeding not to think about all the stuff that I need to do or stuff that's going on elsewhere, but to actually just look at what I'm doing, to listen to the sounds around me, to smell the plants, to smell the soil. So I suppose it's consciously and really intentionally just focusing on what I'm doing, but at the same time not stressing about it. And so we've gone through the whole summer with no ducks on the homestead, and it's felt really peculiar not having ducks around, not listening to them chatter away. So I'm really pleased to say on Tuesday this week, our friends Simon and Rachel brought 3 ducklings over for us, and they are so sweet. Now they're just settling in, and so once they're a little bit more settled, I'll introduce them to you more fully. So I can't really express how excited I am about what's happened. At the weekend we were starting to get ready for the ducks to arrive, and we needed to prepare their area, which is at the other end of the polytunnel, just outside where the duck house is, or at least the summer duck house is. So we were going to separate off the 2 ends of the area so that the ducks were confined and they would be able to get in and out of their house, but they wouldn't be able to wander right through everywhere until they were settled in with us and kind of knew where home was and knew where their food was and had got to know us a little bit. And I was clearing away the stuff that had been kind of dumped there for the last few months, and just as I was moving one pallet, out of the corner of my eye I saw something sort of zigzag, and I thought, oh, what's that? Is it a rat? I wasn't quite sure what it was. It was just something, that movement. Anyway, so I called Mr. J over and said, there's something quite big living underneath the duck house. And he was saying, what is it? Is it a rat? And it's like, well, I didn't think, it didn't move like a rat, so I wasn't really at all sure what it was. So Mr. J came over to have a look, and we kind of went, no, can't see it now. And then out of the corner of my eye, again, I saw a movement. And to our absolute delight, we spotted this. It's a common lizard. Well, they can't be terribly common because I've never seen one before in real life. So I've seen pictures of them, and I've seen geckos and skinks when I've been abroad on holiday, but I have never seen a lizard here in the UK. These Greek gigantes beans, I like to harvest them when they're just turning yellow, or possibly even slightly greener, because it means that I can cook and freeze them for use in the winter. When they've dried out more, I will need to soak the beans before I use them. Now, I'm absolutely rubbish at remembering to soak dried beans, but if you're good at remembering to soak beans overnight before you want to use them, now is the time to harvest them, and then you can finish drying them out in your home, and they'll be great to store in jars for use right through the rest of the year. And while I'm out here, I'm also going to take a few cuttings of one of my favourite fuchsias. So this is, I don't know the variety, but I love the fact that it has pink leaves. So I'm going to take a few cuttings. Now, I would normally put the cuttings into a plastic bag to conserve the moisture. I don't have that with me, but I did have a little jar with some water in it. So I'm literally just going to stand them in the water. Maybe even move those leaves as well. Here we go. But it would be nice if we had more than just one. Aha! There's another one. Again, it's very small, but just for 2 of us, for a side dish and a meal, that's fine. This is the first compost heap I made in this garden, and it's slow composting method, so I'll just put everything in there and leave it to rot down, and it's now been a year and a bit since I put the last thing in it, and all of this year it has been busy growing nasturtiums and tomatoes that were, the seeds were in the compost. But here we go. It's not a huge amount of compost, but this bin wasn't completely full. But I'm very happy with what's there and to be able to move that into the raised bed. Unlike the manure that's already in the bed, this compost heap has been covered for most of the time that it's been here. And I was careful not to put weed seeds into this heap. So I shouldn't be transferring any weed seeds into the new bed. Any of this compost that I don't use in the bed today, I'll cover back over so that the rain doesn't wash all the nutrients out, so that weed seeds don't land in it, and to protect it from the wind throughout the winter months. I gathered together my hand tools and store them. I keep them just out here, but if you have wooden handled tools, it's worth putting those inside to protect the wood from the elements. Otherwise you can end up weakening the wood and the handles can end up breaking. And from inside the veggie pod, I want to harvest some carrots. I sowed these seeds after I had failed dismally with growing carrots in the garden this year. So I thought I'd give it a go with putting some in here. I just broad sowed the seeds. These are a red core Chantenay variety, and they've done pretty well in here. So I'll put these into my bucket. Now I like to take a bucket into the kitchen because that means anything I take off the vegetables, if I peel anything, if I take off the leaves, any of those can go straight back into the bucket, and then I can bring the bucket out and get everything straight into the compost heap, sort of almost all in one process.